Colleagues, please take your seats. So this is a parallel session, C1, on the role of knowledge actors in advancing a new political settlement in South Asia. In other words, the role of think tanks in advancing new ideas, perhaps. So let me just make 3 quick points and then invite our distinguished panelists to make their statements. We're running out of time. We're running behind, actually. And so my goal would be to make up a little bit for that lost time. And the format I will follow is I will give one round of statements, but slightly longer than usual. And that might just be it. And then we will open to the floor, and then we will come back with a closing sort of reaction to what we hear from the floor, and also your closing statement. So 6 to 7 minutes of statements from each of our panelists, open the floor, and then conclude. So hopefully that will be much more efficient than aiming to do a sort of a 2-round kind of a discussion. The first point that the program also notes is to acknowledge that the well-accepted role of think tanks is to promote, foster evidence-based policies, and also provide this safe space for ideas and debate that then legitimize or delegitimize certain policy choices. And folks who are engaged in this exercise also help develop future cadres of policymakers and even politicians. The second point to make here is these think tanks, these so-called knowledge actors in South Asia, also shape political economic processes in South Asia. They often provide a neutral forum for dialogue between groups, between countries, societies, private sector. So it could be the government, could be the NGOs, civil society. So this power of convocation that think tanks can often exercise is very useful to complement the formal processes often mediated through government. So this is where the third point comes in, where think tanks often complement the official processes through track 2 measures. A wonderful example is, of course, South Asia Economic Summits. For the last 14 occasions, everyone from South Asia, representing different parts of our countries, are here talking to each other and making this point that people-to-people ties, non-governmental bonds remain exceptionally strong, but the formal official channels have not worked. This is what has resulted in some discussion this time on how we may be deviating from the overall regional project and talking much more in bilateral and sub-regional terms. But there are challenges. So accepting that many think tanks have done wonderful work in the past decades, and nonetheless, the issue of resource crunch is there. How do think tanks sustain themselves? Where is the money coming from? Are there innovative ways other than handouts from development partners or governments? It is increasingly being realized that there is limiting civic space in some of our countries where you may be censored, you may be watched, you may be intimidated in saying or not saying certain things. So how do think tanks, which are supposed to say what the evidence points out, in an environment which is politically suffocating? And therein comes this pressure to remain neutral. Now, one thing I've noted is we often take examples of American think tanks or European think tanks as being very professional, and we often emulate ourselves. The names like Brookings and Heritage and all that, come into mind. But it has to be noted that they are not neutral. So I actually struggled with this for a bit because, Brookings is left-wing, Heritage and American Enterprise Institutes are right-wing. So yet they are known to be fairly credible and well-respected and known to be quite influential. So therein lies the power of evidence. So you may be value-based in what you preach, but as long as the evidence that you put out can be contested, can be replicated, can be verified and vetted, I think that is the minimum dharma of a think tank. So let me stop there, and we have I'll pose 3 general questions that our organizers have asked us to be covered. So, key lessons from historical roles of think tanks in South Asia. Are there examples, precedences that we should, not lose sight of? This is almost like an intellectual heritage that we continue and consolidate and recognize. Just now, Professor Rehman Sobhan was talking about, how the earlier generation of South Asian thought leaders had pressed ahead with this idea of South Asia regional integration. So it's a time perhaps for the next generation to take that agenda on. So what are those lessons, in your mind? Institutions, forums, panels that have done good work that we need to recognize and take forward. What can they do today given the constraints that I just mentioned: resource, limited civic space, and this challenge to remain fairly level-headed, right? I don't like the word neutral, but fairly level-headed. And finally, how do you navigate impartiality while working on sensitive topics to uphold credibility? So these are some of the general questions. So I will allow each of our panelists to make their statements, 6 to 7 minutes, and then we'll see how we do with time. So let's start in the order with which the names have been listed. Professor Sanjeev Barua, who is the Andy Matsui Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh. Over to you, sir.
Be able to address many of the questions that the chair has posed, because I don't have a think tank experience. I spent a year a long time ago at the Center for Policy Research in Delhi. So what I'll do, however, is I guess I'm a knowledge worker in the sense that I have 40 years of teaching experience in the US though. So I'll see what I can do. And that I'm new to Dhaka. I came to Chittagong less than a month ago. And I'm here thanks to Professor Raunak Jahan, whom I have known from New York and Columbia University for a long time. And I thank her and to the Center for Policy Dialogue for inviting me. So my presentation today actually reflects my thinking about yesterday's presentations. And in yesterday's sessions, we heard, for instance, a number of speakers, notably the Honorable Minister Mannan, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, and Rehman Sobhan, who spoke of South Asia as being a region with civilizational connections, a region that once closely connected, then was broken up, and now getting reintegrated, but very sluggishly. That's my summary, of course. I was struck by, I think it was Rehman Sobhan's point, that South Asia was the most integrated region in the world, more than Europe, and Ishrat Hussein's comparison between South Asia and East Asia. What I'll do today is somewhat different from the previous speakers at the conference. In terms of the theme of the session, role of knowledge actors in advancing a new political settlement, what I'll do is simply look to the past rather than the future, give some historical depth to the points made by Minister Mannan, Dr. Hussain, and Rehman Sobhan. But I'll start with a different note and emphasize the need to think critically about our foundational category, South Asia. This, I'll give you time to read. Area studies model privileges the nation state as the unit of analysis. Like the realist tradition in international relations, it tends to naturalize and reify the identity of actors and that have been far from stable and unchanging units in the modern world. It uncritically takes for granted the existence of stable territorial units, but the making and remaking of territorial boundaries are political projects, not empirical ground realities. So here is a thing which will surprise you why it's here. Take a look. I here for the simple reason I want to problematize the category South Asia. And what I am doing in this thing is not mine actually. Originally I got it from Willem van Schandel. Many of you would know his work. He has worked on Bengal as well. There are 4 settlements in the Eastern Himalayas, each some 50 kilometers from each other. But because of the mostly nation-state centric boundaries we draw, they come under 4 different regions in the world. Gohaling is in Yunnan, East Asia. Sokangdam in Burma, Southeast Asia. Dong is in India, South Asia. And Zayu is in Tibet, Central Asia. That should get us to think. And I'm interested in this borderland, so which is why I thought of this example. I propose that this is that we should sort of be interested in, of course we should be interested in South Asia, but also a different set of units. So I will move to another map for this. This is what I'm going to talk about. Bangladesh and Assam. So most Bangladeshis know what I'm talking about. People who are not from Bangladesh may not know. But the point is that, as I said a minute ago, not to take for granted the existence of stable territorial units. So if Assam is confusing because we don't think about how unstable it is. So then briefly I'll show you this other map, which actually I got it drawn for my last book. Whole point was to show that Assam and Bangladesh doesn't sound as odd when you think about the old Assam. Right? After all, old Assam then has borders Bangladesh and borders Myanmar, borders China, but doesn't border India. Just a 22-kilometer border with India. Right? So clearly it makes a lot of sense then to take out Bangladesh and Assam. So that's basically my point. So, so here is Assam today. I'll just show you how it changes. I'll show you Assam in the 50s. And this is the Assam I'm interested in. Right? Where Sylhet was part of it. Right? And so, in fact, yesterday, when I'm originally from Assam, which is why I got interested in the subject. So yesterday when I told the gentleman that I'm from Assam, he's a distinguished diplomat here who said, I'm from Assam too, because he's from Sylhet, right? We could immediately connect. So, so that's basically, so now I'll show you the slides of basically what happens is how the geographical area that we call Assam changes. So, and here I want to make a political point. The history of border making in the region, both internal and external borders, and the history of tea are connected. So it is not, as I said, not a political neutral thing. It is just something somebody does it. So take a look. British Assam always included the Brahmaputra and the Barak river valleys, as well as the Surma Kushiara river basin of Sylhet. After 1860, the tea industry spread across hills around these rivers and created an effective planter interest in the administrative unity of Sylhet and Assam. So, many of you would know, here is the city of Sylhet, here is the capital of, the capital of Shillong. Shillong was the capital of the entire area for a long period, entire British period. So if you read about, say, Tripura, Manipur, you'll find all important things happened in Shillong. Because Shillong is what the provincial governor was. So entire to understand 1940s, 30s, Tripura, Manipur, Assam, you need, and Sylhet, you need to know Shillong. And one reason I speak some Bangla is because I was born in Shillong. So look at this map. Just picking up a map arbitrarily about the historical tea districts of Assam. You can see it automatically includes Sylhet. Then I want to show you how after partition what happens to this. Now this is how they draw the map of the tea regions of Assam. And this is how they draw the map of the tea regions of Bangladesh. And if you know the both maps, you'll know exactly what's going on. Right? You know the how partition happened, and then there are tea on that side, there's tea on this side, tea on both sides. And this, of course, is tea in the Chittagong tracts, which relates me to one more reason why I want you to think about these things historically. Actually, even Chittagong hill tracts, not only because of tea, is connected, you would notice, in another sense. So Chittagong hill tracts and Mizoram, which was part of Assam earlier, and the Chin Hills, entirely British decision to rule that from 3 different places. Chittagong hill tracts from Bengal, Mizoram from Assam, and Chin Hills from Burma. Enormous connections, so much so that even now, I write some articles in Indian Express. I point out that recently, just 2 months ago, some people from Chittagong hill tract, Lushai people who were some in trouble with the army, they moved, and Mizoram gave
villages in Mizoram. Let them keep. Chin Hills are in trouble. Mizo government gives them shelter. Government of India opposes it. So it's almost humanitarian grassroots refugee, if you like. Right? So you can see the kind of how real these are, not just some historical thing. It just goes on in today's reality. So, and here is, of course, another map of Assam. An entire Bangladesh and Assam was one province. Right? 4 or 5 years. It didn't last, and many of you know the history. In the Indian side, it became the whole issue of the partition of Bengal, right? And that probably was the foundational politics of how eventually partition happened, right? Meaning that, that was really 1905 to 1912. And then when you look at the consequentially, what happened after that, that was the foundational communal kind of political mobilization, if you like. So, and then when you think about this province, is Bengal and Assam. Look at this. The tea industry influenced the decision in 1905 to divide Bengal and create a new province of Eastern Bengal and Assam. Improving railway connections between Assam and the port of Chittagong was expected to bring down the price of tea in England. The tea lobby was strongly behind the word Assam being retained in the name of the new province. Assam tea has achieved significant name recognition by then. Eliminating the word Assam from the name of the province, it was feared, would hurt the industry. So there is, I'm arguing, a visible reminder, since I live in Chittagong, of the interconnected history of this region in the Chittagong's built landscape.
So we need to wrap up here.
Just one. CRB Hills, and many of you would recognize this. So it was really built. The goal was to link the oil wells of Digboy, coal mines of Margarita, to the sea at Chittagong. The port city became the railway's terminus. Those of you who know Chittagong, you'll know this. It was really built as the headquarters of Assam Bengal Railways. So then I have one other just a brief comment about that, and I'll be done. The almost hidden history of the CRB Hill is only one example of the material traces of the past in Chittagong's built landscape that can erupt into the present and intervene into our current concerns. I saw it, immediately I thought of that. Right? Why is it here? Assam Bengal Railway. These are the words of a historian trying to show how history can be a valuable resource for promoting human flourishing. For history to play this role, however, one shouldn't confuse history with heritage. Heritage is not history. Heritage is what people make of their history to make themselves feel good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very, very interesting, fascinating. I think you deserve a whole hour to explain all that. I'm sorry you had to be squeezed in this very dense panel, but I'd love to go over your slides at leisure. Thank you. And the role of creating knowledge, refining knowledge, revisiting knowledge, I think that's very clearly brought out. Thank you. Our second distinguished panelist is Professor Imran Rahman, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, ULAB.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wagle. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a bit surprised that I'm here speaking about the think tank, since I'm really an academic administrator, but I do work closely with several research centers which are part of a university, which are kind of also like think tanks. And I feel a bit scared that I have in front of us the veterans, the distinguished veterans of think tanks in front of me. But nonetheless, I was just looking through the questions, what lessons can be drawn from historical roles of, and I believe Professor Rahman Saman made the wonderful comment that how think tanks were part of the whole period when Bangladesh lead up to the War of Independence and after. And if I look at the role of think tanks today, as a layperson, I see the role and opportunities are far less. And to me, I think the importance of think tanks depends on, I think they're directly correlated to the state of democracy and governance in the country. Think tanks to me seems to be like making policy statements in a vacuum. Nobody is interested to listen to them. So that mechanism is missing, whereby the biggest beneficiary of the output of think tanks, I would think, would be government. And, you know, I don't see the several wonderful outputs of think tanks. And if I think beyond think tanks to civil society and also research and academic specialists, there are plenty of smart people in Bangladesh who are not in government. So there is no mechanism to bring them in the policy-making sphere. If I can just talk about two issues. One is, of course, the ongoing political issues regarding the upcoming elections. And think tanks are coming out with their own sort of suggestions of how to do, but who's listening? Similarly, on the economy, in many countries, the central government is actually very usefully uses think tanks of independent economists and other players to kind of bounce off ideas, to listen to them. I don't see any such mechanism here. So I think there's a huge lost opportunity that the government is missing here. In my area, education, particularly higher education, again, Bangladesh has a long way to go, particularly in improving the quality of education, to making sure that the research being done in universities are effective and have some meaning in the greater scheme of things, and also that our graduates come out with not only with degrees, but with a set of skills that will be sought after by the corporate job market, or even for themselves to start their own enterprises. A think tank in this area is badly lacking. I know that Professor Manzoor is here, and I think, but the point is, again, we kind of think that we will have policy-based research, policy-based think tanks, but to what avail? What is happening to the output? Is there any mechanism really for the government or those who are actually going to implement the policy to accept this, debate this, and sometimes I think that the think tanks, some of the think tanks are under serious duress because of the kind of, some of the prescriptions coming out may not be acceptable to the decision makers. So in a way, I think now more than ever is the time for the role of think tanks to revive themselves, to find a mechanism where they can work very closely with the government, with civil society, with NGOs, with universities, so that we end up making policies which will be the right ones for our country. That's basically it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well under 5 minutes. Very efficient. Thank you, Professor Imran Rahman. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Felix Kolwitz, who is the resident representative of Frederick Ebert Stiftung in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much. And I would like to highlight 3 points, 2 of them from my native Germany, as a bit of an example of what role knowledge actors can actually play to overcome differences, as we have just discussed over the last 1.5 days in this room. Maybe that can be a bit of an insight, some ideas to take away. And then my 3rd point would be to look at FES's role in the region, as we have offices in 4 of the countries in the SAARC region. So let me start with Germany and the European Union. And if you might recall that after the Second World War, it was a very unlikely path that Germany and France become such close partners on the international stage. And one of the, apart from trade on the steel and coal sector, another sector was people-to-people diplomacy, getting people together, and the role of universities and think tanks, and as well as student exchanges that tremendously contributed to this close friendship that not only is now in place between Germany and France, but also across the European Union. some of the things that exist in the European Union when it comes to university cooperation is joint programs, degree programs. So you do study 1 or 2 semesters in one country and then you finish your degree in another country. You have the Erasmus program that enables students to go across borders to other countries to study 1 or 2 semesters in a different university. I myself had the pleasure shortly after Poland joined the European Union to attend a summer school at the University of Warsaw. And these kind of things foster friendships, foster mutual understanding, and that is basically something to build up upon, that when it comes later on to conflicts, you have the backing of the people to actually resolve these. The other example I would like, and that's probably like to mention, that's probably even more unusual considering the outcome of the Second World War after the Holocaust or Shoah, is how did actually Germany and Israel get back together and establish diplomatic relations. And that is, and I have to mention, a group of think tanks, the Max Planck Institutes, that quite early on in the late 1950s, without diplomatic relations, despite the hesitancies in both countries to actually reach out, started a network of scholars to actually build up and try to get these two countries back together. And this was the core of the diplomatic relations that then eventually happened about 10 years later. And considering that Israel and Germany are very close partners nowadays, and that is actually the core. It's a core of think tanks that moved against boundaries, crossed borders, and worked against all odds to actually make friendship happen again. Let me just briefly come to what is FES doing in this region, and also how FES can contribute out of these experiences I just mentioned, but also some of the programs we are having here that I hope, apart from support to CPD, SDPI, and others in this room, is also something where you might be able to see what kind of benefits we can have. So FES, first of all, also has a rather fractured history. Founded in 1925, disbanded in 1933, so I think we can certainly talk a lot about shrinking spaces and how to operate or how not to operate in them. Refounded after the Second World War, and now we are actually a think tank with more than 100 offices around the globe. And all of them are interconnected, not only on the regional or sub-regional levels, they're connected beyond the regional, also to a global level, and we ensure the knowledge transfer in all directions. And I think this network is also something that you can benefit from, that we are hoping that you can also benefit from, but also to mention some ideas on how we provide regional cooperation, or also what kind of asset we might offer. For example, some of the research projects we have done here from Bangladesh involve researchers from Pakistan, and through that, actually certain kind of contacts, friendships over the years could be fostered despite the deteriorating relationships between the two countries. So we serve as a platform to get people together across borders when otherwise it's actually difficult to keep in touch and to do research together, and actually also to maintain and foster friendships. And I would also like to highlight one project that, as I have my colleague from India here, that also works, is a joint fellowship program on geopolitics that was announced a couple of months ago, where young researchers from all over SAARC can actually participate and not only get research funded, but also research stays in another country. Is part of this, so you can actually have a sort of internship of small fellowship in one of the partner think tanks in a different country, and we hope that this can also be the foundation for a network across the region. So let me conclude with some recommendations out of the 3 examples I just mentioned. In order to that knowledge actors, think tanks, universities can build a foundation to maybe revive SAARC, maybe come up with new ideas for regional cooperation, But I think one of the things I mentioned are fellowships. So can CPD host someone from RIS or maybe even someone else from India, Nepal, to actually provide an insight into the culture of Bangladesh and foster mutual understanding? What about joint research? Is that possible that you actually work together on books, on research, on papers, on policy recommendations across borders? I think the pandemic also showed a number of ways of how to use digital formats to keep in touch and to have that exchange. I'm quite aware that coming from Pakistan to Bangladesh and the other way around is fairly difficult, and I think from Pakistan to India is almost impossible. The last point I would recommend is, also building up on the other parts, is actually an exchange. What would it be if researcher A goes to country, maybe from Bangladesh to India, and someone else actually goes in the other direction for a couple of months or maybe a year? That is actually ways of establishing friendships, establishing a network, something that you can build upon later on. I'm quite aware that visa restrictions and so on are still there, but I would still encourage you to think about these kind of ideas that actually helped to build up the strong foundation that the EU has, or as well the strong foundation that Germany and Israel foster today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very fascinating indeed, on how knowledge actors, think tanks have shaped helped shape political settlements. And given what's going on right now in the Middle East, the whole German-Israel relationship, as Felix was saying, was facilitated by knowledge actors. That's very interesting. So if Germany and Israel can patch things up, why can't India and Pakistan, right? And that's where I think, and some of your ideas are also very, very interesting. Okay, so let's turn to Mr. Rinjin Wangchuk, who is from the Journalists Association of Bhutan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not an expert or a think tank, but I'll try to share some of my perspectives on the vital role of knowledge actors in fostering a new political settlement in South Asia. The region, known for its diversity, complexity, and historical conflicts, demands innovative approaches to address its challenges. As Professor Iman rightly mentioned, knowledge actors such as scholars, researchers, educators, and even media personals play a crucial role in this endeavor. Their contributions are multifaceted. They provide a platform for unbiased analysis and research, shedding light on the root causes of regional issues. Moreover, they facilitate dialogues, foster trust, and promote inclusivity. By creating spaces for open discussion and collaboration, they bring together stakeholders with diverse perspectives, transcending politics and ideological boundaries. Such initiative promotes constructive debates and ultimately paves the way for a more harmonized and cooperative South Asia. Knowledge actors also catalysts for change in the region because their research, education, and advocacy contribute to informed decision-making, the cultivation of cross-border relationships, and the establishment of a new political settlement in South Asia. We must recognize their indispensable role in fostering peace, stability, and prosperity for the entire region. Besides, knowledge actors can help identify commonalities among the South Asian countries, which can become critical uniting factors in building peace and harmony. For example, as an all-Asian Buddhist nation, my country, Bhutan, can identify itself with all the South Asian countries through the pan-region Buddhist heritage. However, there is not much scholarship and research on pan-region common heritage. So I see knowledge actors have a big role to play in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rinjin. And that last point on the shared Buddhist heritage. You know, Lumbini, Buddha born in Lumbini, which is in present-day Nepal, is enlightenment in India, Bodh Gaya, Buddhist sites in Pakistan, and then a very living Buddhist practice that's going on in the Himalayas, including Bhutan. I think these are things that can tie us all, but there isn't enough research that has gone on to this. And we in Nepal also have been trying to trace some of the, the famous treks that illustrious Buddhist monks in the past have taken, and maybe mimic that for modern day tourist revival. In addition to the usual Buddhist circuit that's talked about, that's linking Lumbini with other parts of India. So thank you very much. Now let me turn to Professor Dr. Babar Shahbaz, who is the professor and director at the Institute of Agricultural Extension at the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad, Pakistan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. In fact, the question about how think tank, or in the broader sense, how the knowledge actors can contribute into the new political settlement, if we are talking about in the South Asian context. So the advancing political settlement in South Asia requires involvement of various knowledge actors. And when we say the term knowledge actors or knowledge holders, suddenly we jump to the think tanks. The think tanks are the knowledge actors. Although they are one of the major knowledge actors, and so they have the multiple roles to perform. So one major aspect which is generally overlooked is basically the involvement of indigenous knowledge holders into the whole process. So indigenous knowledge holders can provide valuable insights into the local customs, adaptation strategies, local practices, and that can inform policy decisions. So the role of think tank is very important in this context, that they can bridge the gap between policymakers and the local communities by acting as the intermediary. And think tank also provide independent analysis and policy recommendation. If you see in the South Asian context or in Pakistan, I will later on give some examples or case studies. So particularly what is important that the policy recommendation and independent analysis is not influenced by the political or commercial interest. So think tank can also act to bridge between policymaker and the public. One that I mentioned initially is the indigenous knowledge holders, and then other is the civil society organizations, by providing a platform for dialogue and debate. And one important aspect for think tank is that they help build capacity for policy and research analysis, providing access to data and information and promoting best practices in the research and analysis. So this is another area. So cross-border collaboration is also very important, and think tanks can facilitate the dialogues and exchange between the countries in South Asia. So one is the tremendous effort by the Center for Policy Development and other co-organizers. They are providing the platform for the cross-border collaboration. And then also the engagement with the international actors is also a very important aspect of involvement of think tank in the context of political settlement. And we always talk about the track to diplomacy. The think tank often engage in track to diplomacy, which involves unofficial and non-governmental channels of communication. So these are some of the aspects. So challenges, one of the question was about the challenges. So maintaining the independence and relevance is very big challenge for the think tanks, because they are dependent on the funding, either from government, there are government-based think tanks, there are donor-driven. So to keep the balance between maintaining the independence and relevance is very important. And if they become too closely with the political or commercial interest, then it will their trust issue will be raised. And second challenge is balancing the pragmatism and the principles of democracy or upholding democracy. So they can continue to advocate for democratic norms while also working pragmatically with the governments to advance the political settlements. So one example I will quote related to the Pakistan, two major think tanks which are quite proactive in different policy forums. One is the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, which is basically a government-affiliated think tank that has played significant role in shaping the Pakistan foreign policies, particularly Pakistan relations with the India, Afghanistan, and United States. So ISS has facilitated the dialogues and cooperation between different stakeholders. Another is Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI in Islamabad, which is one of the partner of this event. So they have facilitated various dialogues within the country. The SDPI conduct a very huge sustainable development conference every year. And traditionally, they invite in one session all the government personnel in one session, and in second session or second plenary, the people from opposition are invited. And then they are given chance to interact with each other, and they are basically informed about the policy options and all these. And SDP has also given some policy advice in the curriculum review process, particularly in identifying some radical contents in the curriculum and informing the policymakers to devise a more balanced and curriculum which make a tolerant society. So these are my very quick comments about the role of think tank, that how can they work and advance the political settlement, and then what are some examples from Pakistan.
Thank you very much. And I liked your two examples at the end. This is, this links to the discussion in the morning where I argued that the security wallas and the development wallas should talk. So SDPI, I knew about it, but I had no idea about the work of the Institute for the Strategic Studies. So even people like us who've been working in the field of development in South Asia for the last 20, 25 years. So this is, again, role of think tanks in bridging islands of knowledge creation. I think that would also be. And then what the point that you made, then bridge the other gulf between policymakers and the public. So that's very well noted. Our final speaker is Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, Associate Professor at RIS India. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, very grateful for this opportunity to join this very distinguished panel on this very important subject. Let me begin by saying and recollecting what Professor Rehman Shoban reminded us yesterday. Possibly this is a very short phase or a transitory phase of disconnectedness that we are seeing in the region, and we need to rediscover and reconnect with the civilizational roots. And coming from him, I almost take it as a prophecy. Having said this year's SAES, I believe, has been a very successful endeavor in collective soul searching. Having realized the learnings and shortcomings, in the last couple of years. So this year, I believe we have been able to do a little more in terms of how we see the future before us. Somewhere balancing between extreme positions, taking note of history, of course, but not being hostage to history and celebrating heritage, as Professor Barua mentioned in the beginning. Yesterday, we also heard Professor Chaturvedi, Director General RIS, sharing with us that how we should not be overwhelmed and how we need to look for opportunities. At RIS, for some time we have been discussing and doing some numbers around how do we establish a South Asian identity, like identity in many other parts of the world. But South Asian identity would have to be built from a position of strength, and we need to reflect on what are strengths, and a lot of them on development intervention, on our economic growth experience, not fully, but the way some sectors have leapfrogged, how we have stood with each other in times of crisis, how development cooperation has taken shape. So all of that gives us a lot of hope. The last plenary yesterday, as well as the morning plenary that was chaired, the last one was chaired by Devopriya sir, and today in the morning, Madam Raunak Jahan. So a lot of issues were discussed threadbare, and that analysis was important. As an economist, I would think that the LDC graduation that we are discussing for the region also gives us an opportunity to engage more robustly in South-South cooperation, where some of the other regions of the world, despite their resource capacities, have excelled. Economic integration is an agenda that needs to be fulfilled, of course. The interconnectedness, it makes a lot of economic sense for going for deeper economic integration. But at the same time, achieving successful South-South cooperation also gives us a lot of strength to build on in this region, and we can explore what kind of expertise the region has and how it can look at the experiences in the countries that are there. Coming to the issue of knowledge actors, though the concept paper says that it's about the role of think tanks and how far they can go and what they should be doing, but we are encouraged by a fairly balanced panel today with doyens from the university ecosystem as well as other stakeholders from journalism. And that's my third point, because of course, in keeping SAES alive, think tanks, the partner think tanks and others, we got a lot of support in our respective countries from a whole ecosystem of stakeholders, and we have been trying to navigate this process. To some extent, we have been able to do that, which gives us a lot of hope again. During G20 India, what we experimented with, Government of India tasked RIS to reach out to more than 100 universities, because G20 is a complex agenda and you cannot leave the youth aside and the researchers and academics aside. So, a lot of good seminars, workshops, etc. were organized across the country. So that's bridging the think tank, university, curriculum activities and knowledge sharing, which created a lot of impact. In fact, the final event, which was a gathering of more than 3,000 students from all across the country, was attended by Prime Minister himself. On the SDG localization exercise, and I understand it is a very encouraging story from this region. SDG localization perhaps is talked more in this region than any other region of the world. And starting with India, experiences of Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, everywhere. The number of workshops held, the kind of civil society connect we could establish, that was a new kind of outreach that think tanks achieved, perhaps. And I know CPD has been very, very deeply engaged in civil society dialogues. Same as for RIS, it gave us a lot of insights when we partnered with civil society colleagues. We also need to, when we talk about neighborhood first, we need to talk about the humanitarian values and the ethical framework so that there is no compromise on that. We need to talk of empirical evidence, just as Professor Babar mentioned, and core research, because we cannot allow, because this is regional cooperation is a very serious subject and it cannot be just allowed for diplomats to deal with it. So a lot of evidence-based research is needed. We can scale up our initiatives. As Deva Professor mentioned yesterday, we need to set medium-term goals on some of our cooperation issues, but sustainability, of course, is a long-term. And the previous panel, which I participated in, was on climate change and resilience, and there was near consensus and a lot of good lessons from what is happening in South Asia. And just for everybody's knowledge, as Mr. Felix mentioned about several initiatives that has paved for future cooperation. Some of the things that we are doing at RIS, we do an annual summer school on trade, where CPD, SOTI, and others have participated. Because of COVID, we had to pause it for a while, but we want to start it again. If you look at the paper that has been circulated, very kindly put out by Professor Reman Shaban, who talks about the history of SASEF, South Asia Center for Policy Studies, which is a very successful initiative. Till today, it is co-chaired by tall personalities from India and Pakistan. So these are the kind of issues that we should take cognizance of. We should be aware of the cost of non-cooperation. And finally, last one point, we also have a journal that IPS and RIS together brings out, South Asia Economic Journal, and till today we have papers from all the countries together. So with this, I stop.
Thank you. Very good examples on what RIS is doing, and also your point on if think tanks just talk to each other, then there is this insularity that creeps in. So it's how important it is to branch out and bring in new actors and new thinkers, even on issues like SDG localization, LDC graduation, etc. So that's very important. Okay, so let's open the floor, and we'll take maybe 3-4 questions. Here, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Chong Rinzan. I'm the director of the Royal Institute for Governance and Strategic Studies, Bhutan. This particular panel and a few other panels, to me, transcends economic discussions. Particularly this panel is a lot about how can think tanks, academic institutions in the region come together to create ideas. In the BIMSTEC, we have something called the BIMSTEC Network of Policy Think Tanks. So a prominent think tank from each member country forms that network, and we, time to time, meet and discuss, especially around promoting people-to-people contact, but beyond that also feeding some ideas to the larger machinery. I'm not very sure if something of that sort exists in SAARC, but since this panel is also seeking ways or ideas to, how to bring think tanks together, not necessarily to replace the larger SAARC government process, but I think to exercise some influence in terms of how the process can be revived, and maybe as slow as it may be, but still think tanks, CSOs, etc. I think the last 2 days we have had enough discussions around the role of these entities. So in the absence of a similar grouping under SAARC, I'm thinking, since we already have this wonderful platform, 5 countries and doing the South Asia Economic Summit, I believe inspired by the World Economic Forum. Perhaps, I don't know if I should call it a proposal or maybe a food for thought, but if other prominent think tanks in the other SAARC countries could also be made a part of this particular group, and maybe this group can, to me, it's my first time attending this summit, and to me it transcends economic discussions. It is beyond that. So I feel that this can actually, maybe the scope of this summit could be broadened into something like South Asia's Ideas and Economic Summit or something like that, and make it inclusive of all SAARC member countries, particularly by membership of the prominent think tanks. I think it will go a long way.
Thank
This
you.
is just a comment, no question. Thank you so
Very,
much.
very constructive suggestion. Here.
Good afternoon. I'm Sankar Shrestha. I'm an executive director at Nepal Development Research Institute. So just 7 months back in April 2023, we at NDRI also hosted a same session on this role of think tanks in the development of nations. So at that time, we also invited the various South Asian think tanks representatives, including CPD, SDPI, Dr. Famida also joined that session. And in that session, one of the highlights or one of the issues that was brought, I want to reiterate that today, that might be relevant, is like a regulatory structure in each country for the fund transfer or the fund flow. For example, for any research to be a very good one, there need to be a collaboration among the think tanks in the region. It may not be applicable to the universities, but for the think tanks like CPD, NDRI, or even IIDS, SORTI, in Nepal, and also I came to know is a similar situation in Bangladesh. If we transfer the fund from Nepal to Bangladesh, or Bangladesh to Nepal via the think tanks like CPD or IIDS or NDRI, there is some regulatory constraint from each countries. So that is one of the very major barrier for the smooth functioning of the research. Of course, the roles are very important, but such regulatory constraint is very difficult. So is it possible that at least in the South Asian region, such framework or such regulatory barriers can be a bit minimized or something like that? Yeah, thank you very much.
Good, interesting question. Okay, yes, lady here in the middle.
Thank you. First, I would like to share an observation. So I'm just feeling like, interestingly, I'm not seeing any female knowledge expert in the whole panel. So I feel like maybe you are missing sight of female knowledge actors as you are trying to provide a safe space for ideas or debate to shape up the landscape of knowledge and actions in advancing new political settlement in South Asia. So nonetheless, I would like to go to my question directly. So our geopolitical landscape in South Asia is very interesting in terms of, like the first speaker said, the tea border, the refugee settlement, you know, our ongoing crisis in our border issues and other factors that shape up our unique identity of South Asia, right? So while we are trying to create a space for think tanks and also shape up our own identity of advancing the knowledge producing hub in South Asia, are we decolonizing the notion of think tank in South Asia? Because, you know, we all are carrying the baggage and scars of 200 years of colonization. So while reshaping our think tank ideas, how can we decolonize our mindset? Because still we are looking to Brookings Institute or Harvard CID, but to solve our unique problems, how can we make it more localized, and South Asian version of think tanks is really important. So that's my take and food for thought for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good point about female representation. In Nepal, I refuse to participate in panels where there's no at least, you know, one woman, but here I couldn't be very impolite to my hosts who have flown me all the way from Kathmandu, so I couldn't rebel at the last minute. But Hamida, my good friend, who obviously has taken note. Okay, yes, gentlemen at the back.
So thank you very much. I think, first of all, let me compliment you for your earlier, I must say, participation where I heard you. So I must say that is due for you. Having said so, I just, from your own note, I want to read something and would like to understand. Think tank developing future cadres of policymakers and politicians. In my personal opinion, I wish that was done so. And if it would have been done so, probably this SAARC and downgrading of SAARC into regional and sub-regional issues and talking about reframing South Asia wouldn't have come up, you see. The problem is very simple, that decision makers and politicians, normally I would say in whole of the region, I personally believe that based on my own research that they are more of a generic and general knowledge than of any specialized and expert knowledge. And the expert and specialized knowledge belongs to you, where I'm hearing, and maybe people whom I heard. So how you think that think tank can attempt to sort of develop these cadres of policymakers and politicians to be prudent and answerable to those things which think tanks develop? For example, yesterday I was hearing that the group of experts, you see, they developed certain framework. SAARC was also there, 2006, 2008. This will be done 2006. So this all had to be decided, either at the level of decision makers and to be endorsed by politicians, but we failed. So what we can simply conclude is that either your wish over here appears to be absent since then, and probably this also either amounts more than a wish or really it means a business. My second question is that you have written that think tanks under constant pressure to ensure neutrality. Well, if you become neutral, either you are for the people or you are for those people who are ruling the people. You see, something is wrong somewhere. That's why we are discussing over here. So neutrality means your performance should not be there at all. So I really want to understand who is applying constant pressure and in what direction, either for or against. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman there and Professor Raunak after that. Here.
Thank you. My name is Shoaib Chaudhary. I'm not related with the knowledge actors. Rather, I'm involved in the business sector in Bangladesh, and I was the former Vice President of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I'm not supposed to talk on this issue because it's not my subject. But even then, why I'm raising this issue, if you look at the world standard, even forget about the world standard, even if you consider the Asian standard, you will find this region, South Asian region, we are falling behind very alarmingly in regard to the standard of the education, with the exception of India. India still maintaining a good number of education institutes, universities. At least they are not, they are retaining the dignity of this particular sector without any compromise, much compromise. But rest other our neighboring countries, including Bangladesh, the situation is really worsening. As far as my personal experience, I can tell you that while I was a student of university, we had only 6 universities in our country. There are 4 general universities and 2 are specialized, one on engineering and another is on agricultural sector, from which I was graduated. Now, the number of total universities, if I'm not wrong, in Bangladesh is about 170. So, but look at the standard of the education of the sector, this sector. And even while there were only 6 universities, a number of universities, including Dhaka University and some other universities also, has a position on the Asian standard. But now, I hardly find any of the universities of Bangladesh is in the list. So, instead of increasing the number, we must emphasize on retaining the standard of the education.
Thank you.
Since I'm in business sector, even for a mid-level expert, we depend on foreigners to run other industries. Not we cannot depend on the. So this is really alarming. And universities are sort of a factory to build the human resources. Depending on that, the future of a nation is very, very much linked. So we must maintain the standard, and this South Asian region should come up with a
Thank you. So
Thank you so much.
Quantity has gone up, quality has gone down. Is it correlational or is it causal? Time for think tanks and university researchers to look into. Ma'am.
Thank you. Though the title of this panel says Advancing New Political Settlement, but we really haven't elaborated on what is the new political settlement. But I assume what is assumed is at least what is the main theme of this conference, that we want more cooperation, new kinds of atmosphere, or more collaboration, cooperation in South Asia. So I am a strong believer in doing joint research projects, particularly on some of these contested issues. Often we have research projects, but these are being done on the same theme, but separately in different think tanks. What would be better if a topic is taken and researchers from various think tanks work in the team and work together, and then if through data they find and then can come to some conclusions and recommendations, then many of the issues that are contested in different countries, but if the researchers across from various countries can come to an agreement and they can present data, I think then that, I think, is a very strong argument to move forward this. And here, I mean, for the last 2 days, we have been discussing various themes, and they, I think, for instance, climate. And I think there would be funding also available on climate change, so that that can very easily fit into this. Even this value chain that we have been talking about, for instance. But again, I think on every issue that impinges on relationships, often it is regarded as like a zero-sum game. But if the researchers can present that it is not a zero-sum game. So I think that is, value chain is another, and this LDC graduation also is coming up. So these three I could see as very sort of ripe kind of topics on which, if researchers from the various think tanks can work, as I said, not separately, but in a team, I think that would be very, very important here.
Yeah.
And in terms of expanding the think tanks, I think I will leave it to the think tanks to decide. But my last point, just one point I want to make, that actually research and collaboration does help. I have seen, say, over 30 years ago, when CPD was trying to push connectivity, and there was so much regime government opposition to transit, to about connectivity. Nobody could even, I mean, this was not on and was not acceptable to government. But CPD and some of the other institutions, they stayed on the course, and now it is very much accepted, not only by the government, by all the various parties. So the word that you could not use economic corridor here for political reasons, and now this has been, so that if you stay the course for over, and CPD stayed the course, or SAES, whatever, Professor Sobhan stayed the course for 30 years, and that there's this whole thing, which was so much opposed, was a politically such a sensitive topic. Now everybody is on board on this. So my appeal to the younger people is that for some of us who have seen things for many years, we have seen some results, that research and informed arguments and staying the course, does matter.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll give the final word to Professor Rehman Sovan, and then to the panelists for maybe 1 minute of any response.
I would like to remind all here, panelists included, that there is a long tradition of collaboration amongst think tanks. If any of you have had opportunity of looking at the note that I circulated, I traced this process going back all the way to the beginning of the 1980s, where different coalitions of think tanks came together to work collectively around particular issues. I mean, when CPD was hosting the South Asia Center for Policy Studies, an interesting initiative that we took at that time was to set up a series of 5 task forces, and in each of these task forces it was hosted by a particular think tank. I think we had task forces on energy, on transport integration, on joint negotiations in the WTO, on trade cooperation and investment cooperation. In the preparation of each of these exercises, the participating institutions were supposed to provide inputs so that it would come out as a collective product, and that the final task force report would represent not just the work of an institution, but the work of 5 institutions. And then, having produced these task force reports, we did not want to leave this simply as an academic exercise, but we wanted to use them as advocacy instruments, so that we then initiated a series of conferences around the region where we were bringing in the respective policymakers, business community and civil society actors, where we could then collectively present these task force reports before them to show the areas of possibility for cooperation within the South Asian region. So this tradition, of course, has been there, but it has its ups and downs. I'm not quite sure where we would rank it now in terms of whether it's having its ups and downs, but the SAES process itself is an attempt to at least bring these institutions together and to then generate a visibility to the idea of South Asian cooperation. But for this to be a sustainable process, it needs a much more active and a much denser arrangement for research collaboration, which has been discussed by some of you over here. And that what we really need is an ongoing and institutionalized set of relationships where such collaborative research can go on. Because whatever may be happening at the political level, the fact that a vast constituency of intellectuals and professionals and other members of civil society are acting together to look at common problems and then suggesting ways to address them, not through any process of contestation, but through collaborative thinking, I think is a very critical element in sustaining the idea of South Asia. And whether you call it new or old political settlements, or you identify it as promoting a more harmonious and cooperative relationship, I think this knowledge input is a very critical element. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Let's, if you would like to make some final comments for about a minute or so, we can start from our right here, Mr. Rinjin Wangchuk.
Mine is just one recommendation. The recommendation for the statement that I made would be to encourage knowledge actors or think tank to focus on studying and promoting pan-region common heritage among South Asian countries, particularly with regards to the shared Buddhist heritage, as Chair had mentioned, Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, Pakistan, like places like that. I'm sure such research and scholarship can help foster understanding, unity, and peace in the South Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Barua.
Theme, I explained why I didn't. But I do want to talk a little bit about think tanks because it's come up so much based on just experience. And so I think I agree with the point about decolonizing. But it seems to me that what's interesting about think tank to me, I'm old enough to remember, about, 40 years ago, think tank was a very American term. I don't think anybody used the word term in South Asia. So clearly it's American history. So in the sense of all the question of independence that has come up, my own sense is this, that it is not just, say, independence, ultimately money is important. We know from the pressures now built even for places like Center for Policy Research, it's really the whole money, right? It's a government money, if you like. So it seems to me whenever you're talking about American think tanks, I agree with you, they're not neutral, right? They're Brookings' agenda, right, etc. All that is true. However, the tradition of giving is huge, not just rich people giving. And it's not merely giving to think tanks. Mind you, think about the fact that in New York City, Philharmonic Orchestra, Lincoln Center, the museum, all are private. Unthinkable in many other countries. So the whole tradition of giving is huge in the US. I have a lot of criticism about the US, foreign policy, etc. But one thing I've admired, and most of us think it is only rich people give. Not true. Talk to anybody, talk to any college like the one I taught. Lots of $20 checks, $30 checks. Then, say for instance, colleges are often what they find is that suddenly somebody died and gave it to $10 million, left all his money to the college. Never happens in South Asia. Why not? We give to temples. Islam has a strong tradition, right, to give it to, but to giving it to a secular institution is just completely new. And that is done there for the same, as you know, South Asians often talk about American families being not strong, etc. Whatever the truth of that, the fact is people feel perfectly fine about leaving all the money to somebody else. Right? And so that it's not just rich people. So if you have a lot of money, you don't even have to have a lot of money. Right? I mean, you don't necessarily, idea that you leave everything to your children doesn't occur to anybody. Right? So that tradition is very hard to build. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Raman.
Thank you. I just wanted to share kind of like a good news. That is, traditionally Bangladeshi university-based researchers have not really been collaborating with regional stakeholders, but the trend is changing, and I'm happy to share that ULAB is amongst other universities like BRAC, Independent, North-South, are increasingly doing kind of inter-country research, mostly after winning competitive international grants. So this is a really wonderful start. Dhaka University was known for its research prowess in the early years of its creation, but somehow we dropped that research ball. So we kind of are picking it up again, once again, and also involving some of our public universities as well in this. So I just wanted to share hopeful news on this front. Thank you.
Thank you. Felix Kolbetz.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to come back to this topic of shrinking spaces, and it was a question of what is actually happening and who's doing that. I think it was last week that Scholars at Risk published the latest Academic Freedom Index, and there are lots of case studies, and this region is highlighted quite prominently in there with different cases, different examples on how these spaces are shrinking. So I would highly recommend you to have a look at that. It also goes back for the last couple of years, so you can also see is a yearly comparison how the situation has changed and has actually deteriorated in most of these countries here. Coming back to the idea of a political settlement, I tried with my examples in the beginning to show or to highlight how academic and think tank collaboration can actually build the groundwork for future political settlements. As they might have been quite a while ago, I can also give you a third example, and that is of New York University with branch campuses in Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi, and actually most of the negotiations between that actually eventually led to the Abraham Accords between Israel and the United Emirates, where it took place at New York University. So also there, it's actually a knowledge actor that played a vital role in leading to political settlements. But I think one last point I would like to make, and that is going back a bit to the idea of decolonization, setting up your own think tanks. How far are you actually depending on think tanks from Western countries, such as the one I'm representing here? And that is a topic of funding. And if you look at South Asia, there are lots, the idea of philanthropy is not very well established. And if you look at how most of the American think tanks, a number of European think tanks are actually being funded, it's not only governments, it's also a lot of private donors that are ready to actually donate substantial amounts of money into that kind of research. And on the one hand, I mean, we had a number of people here also representing the private sector, but if you actually look at the amount of donations from the private sector into academic institutions and think tanks in South Asia, that is extremely low. So I think that would also be something, if you actually want to become independent from international knowledge actors, is to set up funding systems such as private donors, government funds, and so on here in the country, and that it would be one substantial step in order to maybe not cut, but at least reduce the dependence on such institutions as the one you mentioned. Thank you.
Sabya?
Firstly, I'd like to echo what our sister from there said. The moment I sat on this panel, I realized that there is no lady on the panel, so a bit of this thing for me as well. Very briefly, for think tanks, we need to be innovative in our thinking. We need to be imaginative. CPT has existed for 30 years, RIS for 40 years, but there are new knowledge actors around. But the advantage of some of the older think tanks possibly is the tradition and the rich repository they carry with them, and for regional processes that is very, very important as we collaborate with the wider and very dynamic ecosystem that is coming up. Two more points I wanted, in my previous remarks, I wanted to endorse and share my kind of common view on what Professor Sabas said on traditional knowledge systems. It is something that we need to look at. And on the question of shared Buddhist heritage, very recently I had the good fortune of visiting the new avatar of the Nalanda University that has come up alongside the very close to the Nalanda ruins, and the amount of energy and the kind of departments that have come up on the Buddhist studies and heritage, very, very impressive. They have students from over 100 countries, Southeast Asia, I suppose from South Asia as well. Some good work going on there.
Thank you. Dr. Sabas.
Maintaining neutrality, in fact, is key to gain the trust of the parties in the contested situation, particularly if we want to advance, if think tanks want to advance the new political settlement. By neutrality, it doesn't mean that you are not on the either side. Maintaining neutrality means the policies given by the think tank, the piece of publication, the advice, these are the research informed. These are the data-driven. These are the evidence-based. So once you are giving the evidence-based policies, then think tanks would definitely be having the trust of the both parties if we are talking about the political settlement. By political settlement, by the way, I mean that what I take political settlement is the sort of agreement or understanding between the powerful political elites, what we can say that it is. So being neutral is only possible when we have research-informed, data-driven policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't dare summarize the rich discussions here, but just a few parting thoughts. Professor Rahman was telling me he's a graduate of the London School of Economics, whose motto is, in Latin, is rerum cognoscere causes, to know the causes of things. And that's exactly what think tanks and knowledge actors are trying to do. And the struggle, the challenge we face in terms of funding, in terms of carving that space when the authorities are illiberal or hostile, and and that challenge to remain impartial while adding to credibility. I think these things are very, very important. I think Sanjeev Barua and Mr. Rinjin both highlighted different aspects of the importance of knowledge in areas that is not traditionally looked into. So I learned a lot from the slides myself. And how does that then lend itself to the policy space, right? What are the policy implications? But not all knowledge need to be policy, need to have policy applicability. So a lot of the knowledge could be pursued for the sake of it. And that's, something that I take away from Amartya Sen's work on the Human Development Index, the whole paradigm of human development, that knowledge is good as an end in itself. It could be a means to enhancing productivity. It could be good, good in other aspects, but pursuit of knowledge, quality knowledge, is an end in itself when you define development in terms of human freedoms and flourishing and all that. So that's, I think, very important. Some great examples from Felix on, again, the political settlements, also suggestions for these cross-institutional fellowships that basically track 2 initiatives. When the states are not talking to each other, the track 2 channels ought to be much more active. This is partly what we're doing here. SAES is, continuing. And joint research, the ideas that have come, and the point that that has been made that these things used to be done through SASEPs, for example. So, but at the end of the day, it's all funding, right? And this is one challenge that we face. The word decolonization, it's easy to throw words around, but I think rather than labeling everything that comes from a particular location as bad, Brookings, again, as Professor Baru was defending, the rigor, the culture of giving, philanthropy to sustain those impartial institutions, that's something we could emulate. So if there's something good that's coming out, we should take it. And this is exactly what we're trying to do in Nepal. So IIDS, a 44-year-old think tank in Nepal, which I currently have the honor of chairing, and Dr. Gauchan is the executive director here. What we've said is we've been donor dependent for 3 decades, 4 decades. Can we wean off our dependence on donors and look for indigenous sources of funds so that we can at least be, if some donor would like to give some money in an area that is aligned with our interests, that we deem to be in our national priority list, that's fine. But we're not going to chase donor money, just throwing proposals and catering to their whims and fancies. And so to do that, we need to be financially independent. We need a healthy endowment to get our think tank going. So even if there's no single dollar money coming in, we can at least sustain our organization. And that's exactly what we've set out to do in the last 3-4 years. So there's an example. We're looking for good examples in the region on how to make indigenous think tanks viable. I think we're headed in that direction, and it is something that we're quite proud of. And that was possible by tapping very enlightened domestic private sector folks, philanthropists, right? And this culture of endowment, I learned from the America. You give a healthy amount of money, you name a building after a person, that's it. You recognize the giver, but the good thing is done, built. So we try to transplant that experiment in Nepal, and I think we're getting there. We would like more donors, generous philanthropists to come in, but this is, I think, he's exactly right, that it's, but if you are dependent on American donors or German donors, it's a two-way thing. So I think it's a very important point, and this also government funding, right? Again, endowments. The European Social Research Council, another great example. NIH grants in the United States, another great examples. I think in India, you are now seeing a lot of the government grants to foster domestic scholarship in uncharted areas. So these models, I think, ought to be emulated if they are good for our own interests. Other points, the issue of bridging policymakers and public, etc., that have been covered, branching out, coming out of this insularity to bring in new actors. I think Davos-style World Economic Forum. I don't think SAES was designed to be World Economic Forum. That's on a much, much bigger league and scale. But it's a great idea to, I think, broaden this. But who's going to pay for it? Again, look at the logos here, right? So this is, again, very, very important. How do we sustain these things? Other points, well, I think all self-evident and self-explanatory. Finally, I think the challenge, everybody agrees, knowledge actors are important, knowledge is important, but as a cynical politician friend of mine keeps on saying, who can argue against heaven? We know heaven is good, right? The point is how to get there. And once you get there, how do you stay there, right? So this is the challenge. So sometimes, we discuss things that we know are good, that are desirable, that's out there, which should be pursued. The challenge is in the steps that we take to reach that heaven, that Shangri-La of knowledge. Okay, thank you to my distinguished panelists, and I've saved, I think, 5 minutes for the organizers. Thank you.